Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome to our Hoard's Dairyman monthly webinar series. My name is Abby Bauer, and I will serve as the host for today's program. Thank you for joining us for the webinar, which is titled The Dairy Industry and Outlook for 2025. Our presenter is Leonard Polzin, the Dairy Markets and Policy Outreach Specialist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. A new year often brings excitement as well as uncertainty as we wonder what the milk price will do and where dairy demand will go in the next 12 months. Leonard will discuss some of the factors that will influence dairy prices in 2025 and share some of his predictions for the year ahead. He'll also address the current situation regarding the potential changes to the federal milk marketing orders. This January kicks off the 15th year of our monthly webinar series, and we're thankful for all our dedicated listeners who have tuned into the programs over that time period. All of our past webinars are available online at hoards.com if you want to check out the webinar tab and visit the website and view any of those old webinars. If you're listening to the presentation live today, you have access to a PDF copy of the slides. You can find that in the handout section of the GoToWebinar control panel. Just click on that link to the PDF and there you can save the slides or print them out. If you have any questions for our speaker today, you can also type those into the control panel. There's a question section there, and we'll address those following the presentation. Now it is my honor to introduce to you today's presenter. Leonard Polzin grew up on a Wisconsin dairy farm and received a bachelor's degree in dairy science and agricultural business from the University of Wisconsin-River Falls. He later went on to complete his graduate work in agricultural food and resource economics from Michigan State University. He has extensive experience as an educator and an analyst, and he brings that to his position at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, having developed and delivered programming on topics including market analysis, outlook and market expectations, risk management, and policy analysis. Leonard, thank you for joining us, and I look forward to hearing your presentation and your thoughts on the milk prices, the dairy markets, and what's to come in 2025.
Well, thank you very much. Greatly appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to be here, that's for sure. So I think, as you said before, Dairy Markets and Policy Outreach Specialist with UW Extension Division of Madison. Dairy economist for short. As you mentioned here, I think it's we'll go through kind of what we're looking at for our time together here. So I think it's important as we get towards some of our final and next stages of the Federal Milk Marketing Order update process that we kind of provide some dates and what comes next there. After that, we'll look at where some of our dairy products kind of across the whole complex look for 2024, and based on the data that we have in, kind of what some of the bigger winners or losers were in there, and seeing if we can kind of tease out any trends for dairy products that we've seen in 2024 and what that might look like for the year ahead. And of course, I think one of the big things that is changing at the moment that's on our radars as far as what 2025 will bring is the supply side of dairy. And then we'll dive into some of the demand, and then from there look at the worldview and kind of come up with somewhat of a forecast and what we're expecting for the year ahead. So we'll dive right into the Federal Milk Marketing Order referendum here. So just some very quick background. The objective of federal milk marketing orders is to promote orderly marketing conditions in fluid milk markets. So a lot of times people will ask me, hey, why can or can't we do XYZ thing in this order reform or hearing process, right? Since we're all together, why don't we address these other things as well? Well, the reason for that is that the original legislation which created federal milk marketing orders kind of sets the guide rails on what we can and cannot include in that hearing process, right? So again, this is addressed for fluid markets and kind of some of the ancillary things that are a part of those. So we always think of federal milk marketing orders as for classified pricing and pooling, right? And their functions there. But there's a lot of other activities that federal milk marketing orders do. I think some of them that are easy to overlook are the weights and measures and component and volume audits. So the orders themselves will audit those things, make sure that everything is up to snuff, if you will, with those processors that are transforming that raw milk into that saleable product. Federal orders also dictate and ensure timely payments to producers. So if this legislation was not in place, then the formal traffic cop function of that the federal orders perform would then be non-existent, right? So another thing is that they provide a lot of market information, products, pricing, things like this, that a lot of times are used as reference prices for the industry. So without federal orders, the way in which we receive our information and what a lot of processors use for those, reference prices would be changed as well. Federal orders also do export certification services, facilitate some checkoff programs, so on and so forth. So let's kind of dive right into the recommendations of this decision. So the first of which is change in standard milk composition. So this comes from this trend that we've been seeing over time of our solids, our fat and protein production in our 100 weights of milk increasing year over year for quite some time now. So so we're accounting for that in the math here as well. So protein would be up from 3.1% to 3.3%. Other solids would be up as well, so 6%. Non-fat solids up to 9.3%. So that'll account for more of the solids production that is happening through the mathematical process to arrive at the different pricing components of federal orders here. So the next is removing cheese barrels from that class 3 price. So right now we price based off of the 40-pound blocks and the 500-pound barrels. USDA's recommendation is to drop the 500-pound barrels as their conclusion is that it's sufficient enough information and market representation to simply include the block price to calculate those prices. So this one I haven't read because it seems to be the one that does get the most attention, and probably rightfully so, which is that increase of make allowance for cheese, butter, NDM, and dry whey. So like we talked about briefly here, when the processor receives that original milk from the farmer, they then have to transform it, and then we end up with that product that is sold. And that product that is sold is what the USDA surveys to get a wholesale product price from. So from that wholesale product price, we then need to back out the math to say what our producer's going to receive as their component price. So the way we back out that math is to take that wholesale price less some sort of make allowance, which accounts for that transformation of that original milk that the farmer is selling to get to an end product, right? So that's what we mean by end product pricing, and that's why we have this thing called make allowance. So what kind of started this discussion is that we've seen milk check premiums, some people call them overorder premiums, have gone away over time, and some cite that the reason for that is that the cost of transforming this milk into a raw product has went up and not kept up with the set federal milk marketing order make allowance. So part of the hope in this process is that as we increase make allowance, we would see some dynamic market factors that would then hopefully increase pool participation and also increase the premiums back to those dairy producers. So and another reason why this make allowance is important to look at and consider is that it's used in our class 3 and our class 4 pricing, and increase from anywhere to 5 to 7 cents per pound, and that's on the processed pound of product that the manufacturers are making. So One thing in this is that we are having an increase in butterfat retention factor in cheese, which means that we're again more representative of that butterfat retention that's happening in the real world in that manufacturing process. So what that will do is it will provide a slight bump to the dairy producer and their pay price as well, simply because we're accounting for more of that butterfat in the calculation that is going into that cheese production. So that will be work to increase that producer side paycheck. So the next thing here is that we are reverting to the higher of advanced class 3 or class 4 skim milk price for that class 1 skim milk price. So this is the system that we had before, and then we changed to the average of plus 74 cents. So average of class 3 or class 4, and then put that 74 cent coefficient on there. And then that's what we used, and now we're returning to the higher of. So I would expect that at least in the short term here, we would see some increase in producer pay price from that as well. One new thing here is a provision that USDA came up with to handle extended shelf life milk. So the goal here is that ESL milk is a little bit of a different product than your traditional gallon fluid milk that you use on your breakfast cereal, simply because of its shelf life, right? So I think that USDA tried to come up with something here that accounts for some of the risk management and business practices on that, and hopefully it will be to the advantage of all, so that way we can hopefully maybe see a little growth in that sector as we proceed. So one thing, like we said in the beginning, that federal milk marketing orders are focused on the fluid milk markets. Well, we have these things called this class 1 differential. And this class 1 differential, or some people call it a class 1 price surface, it's the spatial or geographic component of federal milk marketing orders. And what this does is it takes into account where surplus milk production areas are, and deficit areas, and then tries to incentivize the movement of fluid milk from these surplus areas to these deficit areas of production. So that way the fluid milk, right, that actual, like say, gallon of milk that'll end up on the grocer's shelves, has that incentive to move to these areas where otherwise it may not move as efficiently or effectively without this accounting for these transportation costs and so forth. So increase in Wisconsin of about $1.20 per hundredweight, and retain that $1.60 per hundredweight minimum differential value. The big thing as we kind of look at the impacts of all of the federal order decisions here, I think USDA weighted the impact of each of these and tried to make it not overly, we'll say, detrimental or to the positive side on producer price in aggregate, right? But seeing as the dairy industry is infinitely complex, right? We have different geographies that produce more or less milk, and even within those geographies, we have utilization of milk that's very different, right? So because of that, we'll have like in the Midwest here, high class 3 or cheese utilization for milk. Other areas where they have more class 1 or class 2 utilization, they're going to see more of an increase or benefit from these recommended changes than we will, simply based on our geography and utilization of milk. So something important to remember is that I think USDA did their best to try to weight the implications of all things here, but we are going to see differences regionally, simply because of the way that our industry happens to be structured. So kind of where are we at in the process? Well, ballots had to be submitted or postmarked by December 31st and received very shortly here by January 15th to the order administrator. So Once all the ballots are received, they'll be counted, and then we'll receive some sort of information, notification on what's happened, and if the vote has passed or not. So assuming that process goes well and that there's no lawsuits or anything like this, right now we would currently be looking at implementation of these changes to be somewhere in March and April-ish, around there, of 2025. It's important to note, though, that there'll be a stepped-in implementation process for these changes. So make allowance increase will happen tentatively around that, like we said, March-April time period, but the next implementation is going to be 6 months after the implementation of make allowance, and that's the increase of those standard protein and other solids levels. So the big thing there that I would encourage folks to be aware of or know about is your risk management practices. So it wouldn't be unrealistic that we would see some price pressure from the increase of make allowance. When that happens, some of that I think is already kind of accounted for in the market, but I wouldn't be surprised if we do see a bit of movement there simply from that implementation time period. And then again, wouldn't be surprised to see that 6 months later, some additional price movements potentially down, 6 months after, again, that implementation of make allowance. So, as this whole process was happening, I was often asked, how should we vote on this, right? Because if we know that, especially here in the upper Midwest, that we would see a decrease in producer pay price, why would we want to vote for that, right? Well, to answer that, I think it's important to consider that, when you're voting on this, we're not voting for, do we want these changes or do we want to go to the status quo? We're voting for, do we want these changes or do we not want federal orders? So, if we don't have federal orders, we would then have lose all of those functions that we mentioned earlier, and we would lose that traffic cop function, if you will, which is kind of one of the last remaining, we'll say backstops on the dairy producer side at the moment. So I do believe that, yes, it would be possible to replace some of these functions with legislation, but again, as we've seen with the Farm Bill and other things, legislation can be cumbersome, and if there was going to be no federal order, it wouldn't be too bad of an idea, in my opinion, at least, to have some sort of backstop in place, before that process would happen. So, the other portion of this is when I get asked, where folks may want to consider voting. So one, if federal orders go away, that traffic function leaves without it. But also, when we've seen federal orders voted out, we've seen milk prices more closely approximate that Class 3 price. And when we've done some dynamic modeling with Dr. Chuck Nicholson and Dr. Mark Stevenson here at UW, we've seen that even with the implementation of the federal order changes and the expected decrease in milk price from that's still higher than what the approximate Class 3 price would be. So even with the orders, we would still see prices higher than what we would anticipate that Class 3 price to be. So that's kind of the second big thing. And the third big thing is that, as we'll see in a second, some of the negative price effects of the federal order changes, as we go over time, become less and less. Whereas if we didn't have the federal orders, we would see that decrease in price, and then we'd see that kind of for the foreseeable future. So hopefully some solace there when people think of, and we'll see some of the negative price impacts that, the hope, the model, the theory is that we will see some of these return as we increase over time. So, and again, also we would eliminate any of the potential PPDs or producer price differential payments if we didn't have federal orders. and all the way through October of 2024, they were positive of $1 or more here in the upper Midwest. So something to think about there. So this is what I was talking about on the price impacts or price implications that we're likely to see. So on that graph on the left, you can see that there's quite a bit more things above that zero line than there is on the graph on the right. And a lot of that is because we're graphing that class 1, class 2 prices. So class 1, because of those class 1 differentials, that spatial component, we would expect that we'd see a decent increase in price there, and continued so over time. Taking a look at the right side graph here, the two things I want you to look at are that class 3 price, which is that blue line, and then that class 3 component price, which is that gray line. So where producers are going to notice this most, especially like I say here in the upper Midwest, simply because of our class 3 utilization, is that we'll have approximately a 60-cent decrease in component prices. And then we're translating that to, we'll say 10-cent, just under decrease in that class 3 price. So one thing you'll notice as we go along, that decrease in component price does become less and less. And then as we continue up, again, we would expect that the impacts of this legislative change to be less and less over time. That class 3, we do have that dip, so we'd see kind of a little bit lower price before that recovery does happen. One thing we're going to wrap up kind of our discussion on federal orders here shortly, but one thing I do encourage you to keep in mind is that federal orders are a mechanism of calculating a portion of producer pay price, right? So it's not the entire milk check, and it's not where all of the value of your milk check comes from. It's a portion of that, and at the end of the day, markets influence prices way more than what federal orders or any federal order change that's recommended will. So while we would see these price impacts, right, any sort of policy change, market change, what have you, I think has the potential to far outweigh any differences in producer pay price than what we're seeing right now. So again, some of these implications, it'll depend on, it depends on where the vote falls, obviously, whether we keep orders or not. It will vary by order, and it does vary over time. If anybody is interested, feel free to take a look at dairymarkets.org, and we have all of these information letters out there that kind of show you in detail what each recommended or proposed change to federal orders is and what their implications are. So also, if you look on, just pull up YouTube and type in federal order reform, we have quite a few hours of recorded content there as well. So kind of shifting gears here for a bit, I kind of want to go through what the 2024 has shown us for dairy product trends. So what we've done is taken year-to-date information through October, because that was the most recent report that's come out here. So I realize that we're not all the way through 2024, but we're still waiting on USDA for the rest of the end of the year data here. But we'll kind of take a look and see where some of our biggest winners and losers were, and see if we can kind of extrapolate out any trends from that. So if we take a look at where this is kind of like that entire complex of dairy that we'll be looking at and breaking down here for a few minutes. We have at the bottom left, the Italian cheese category has been very interesting recently. And you can see if we add all of that up, we're at about 16, 17, 18, 19-ish% of this entire dairy market complex. We'll see here shortly that cottage cheese is at an interesting year, but when we take a look at percent changes, you can tell that in total that we're say maybe 4% of this entire piece of the pie. Yogurt is at 16.5%, so we'll look at some of the trends within that. And then on the right, kind of I've made a box around our American cheeses, and you can tell that we have, say 19%-ish of the entire market in those categories as well. So just wanted to touch on this so that way when we talk about percent changes, we can kind of keep in mind, which product categories, are really moving the entire ship, if you will, when we take a look at some of these changes. So some of the highlights here, or at least the things that stand out, is that total American cheese production is down we'll call it 3.6%, and that translates into 175 million pounds. But probably on the more bright side here, plain and flavored yogurt is up with a pretty good pound increase there, 215 million pounds. Butter is up 5.6% at 99 million pounds. Total cheese is up approximately 0.5%. And cottage cheese is really having a moment as well. So we have our regular cottage cheese about 10.5% up, low-fat cottage cheese up 11.27%. We'll circle back to low-fat cottage cheese because that was kind of an interesting spot in the market here. So in the future here in a moment, we'll kind of highlight some of that. Some of these graphs here I wanted to share simply because I think they show this trend from some of those highlights we just talked about. This American cheese types, we've kind of been on a pretty good trajectory, 2020 all the way through 2023. Every single year we've been seeing these increases, and then 2024, and mind you, these are all year to date, so they're all over the same time period. 2024 has been off just a bit. When we take a look at total cheese production, this orange type line that goes down, it just shows that we've been decreasing over time here in a percent change year to date, but we've still remained positive. As you can see on the right hand axis there, we've still remained positive in change, but just the amount of growth has been decreasing. I think that's relevant for the current period of time because right now we're looking at a large amount of production capacity coming online in 2025 and further out across the entire dairy complex, but particularly in the cheese sector. So I wouldn't be surprised that as we get into 2025 and future years that we would see a pretty good increase in this total cheese production. Kind of going to the top right here in butter production, we saw a slight decrease from 2020 all the way down through 2022. And now we're kind of on that increasing side again in butter production. And again, same story as in cheese, there's more butter processing facilities coming online. So I think as we progress through 2025, I would expect that this butter production would increase as well. Again, cottage cheese, we said that as a total percent of the market, it may not be large, but I think it's really interesting how fast and how much we've increased here. We've seen 10% increase in 2023, almost 11%, and now we're at over a 10% increase again in 2024. We kind of after that COVID period came down a little bit, and it looks like now we're headed back up. So good news on that side. When we look across the entire cheese complex and we kind of break it out here, we have a lot of interesting things and good changes here. So mozzarella cheese is up again, like we saw at the beginning, very big percent of the cheese market. Italian cheeses were up 2.84%. We'll kind of break those out in a future slide here and see who the winners and losers were there. Cream cheese is doing very well. Colby, Monterey Jack up as well. Gouda is very interesting, 31.74% increase here with 15 million pounds of additional production compared to the previous year at this time. Blue cheese doing well, Brick Munster doing well too. So I just wanted to take a look at Gouda and cream cheese here quickly, simply because Gouda, let's take a look at that increase from 2020 kind of a very steady trajectory all the way to 2022. We dropped a little bit in 23, but more than made up for that in 2024. So potentially either found new markets or consumers have been gravitating more towards that. And then maybe not the same trend, but somewhat similar here is in that cream cheese category. 2020 to 2022 saw really good increases, kind of fell off. In 2024, more than came back. So it'll be kind of fun to see where those two categories do go in the upcoming year. Italian cheese, again, we said that total Italian cheese was up 2.4%. But when we take a look and kind of break it out, our Parmesan and ricotta have really kind of fallen off, where our other types, our Romano and our Provolone, have kind of carried the day for Italian cheese here. Ice cream. So I think there's some interesting trends here when it comes to ice cream. But first, let's take a look at the percent of the market that is our, very traditional hard regular ice cream. That's 66%. So when we take a look at moves, those are kind of the first place to look to see how our this segment of the industry is going. Followed by our low-fat hard ice cream at 20%, and then our low-fat soft at 14%. But this non-fat hard ice cream is a very small portion of the market. But keep that in mind as we take a look here. Some of our biggest decreases, if you look on the right-hand side there, second from the bottom, that non-fat hard ice cream, which again, we said was a small percent of the market, but also take a look at how much it dropped, 22%, almost 23% year to date, with about 1.5 million gallons decreased in production over that time period. I think this ice cream category might be somewhat of an indicator on what the market has an appetite for. When we look at that regular ice cream category, we're up almost 3%. But as we take a look at some of our ice creams that have that, less fat content in them, pretty much across the board, we've seen decreases in those. And if you take our two products here, our low-fat hard ice cream and our low-fat soft ice cream, and add them up, that's where we get this number at the very bottom that says low-fat ice cream, our total, right? So if we take all of our low fats, we're down 10.7%, let's call it. And then our non-fat, again, we're down almost at 23%. This is just a breakout of that non-fat hard ice cream. And ever since 2022, we've kind of been on that downhill slide. So the good news is that, like we said, as a percent of the total market, fairly small, but anywhere where we can clear dairy product is a plus to the producer. So it'll be interesting to see where 2025 comes in for this particular segment of ice cream. So kind of sticking with the desserts here just for a second is our frozen yogurts. One reason I wanted to highlight this is that if you look at the very bottom and we have non-fat hard frozen yogurt, again, this non-fat category had a fairly big loss, over 33% decline year-to-date change, which equates to about 1.12 million gallons, where the other categories, or the other ones that do have some or more fat in them, did see an increase last year. So maybe it's a trend. Maybe we're seeing these changes in consumer behaviors. I would say from this, that might be a little bit hard to say definitively, but I think it might be somewhat of an indicator on changing preferences. So the whey market, we'll see here in a second, seems to maybe be having some of those same thoughts or considerations on the consumer side, but simply because of what's happening in the dairy industry in total at the moment, it's kind of hard to break that out and say. Partially because as we look at where a lot of these products are being produced, are some of the same areas where we're seeing increased cases of HPAI, highly pathogenic avian influenza, So some of that can influence production as well. But I do think as a general takeaway, it'll be interesting to see, you know, if some of these trends or changes here do continue through 2025. I want to group a couple categories here, starting in the top left. At the very top of the pie graph, this green, light green slice is our whey protein isolates. And then of the whey products here that we're looking at, it's approximately 10% of the total whey production that's happened. So, and then if we want to group this WPC 50 to 89% along with this WPC 25 to 49%, we have this purple and blue slices here that make up a fairly significant portion of our total production that's happened. And then also on the right, of course, this one that really stands out is that orange slice, which is our dry whey product that's been produced. So as we take a look at where some of these changes happen, obviously the ones that are going to move the most or you know, influence the most are these dry whey and then WPCs, simply because they do have such a large percent of the market on the production side. So where did we see losses? We saw quite a bit in our total dry whey, so 8% down, but take a look at what that calculates out to, about 70 million pounds. If we go to the very bottom of the table here, our skim milk powder, year-to-date production change about 18.5%, which comes out to about 103 million pounds. Just above that, non-fat dry milk, just over 11.5% decrease, where we have 186.81 million pounds less of production there. I do want to point out one more thing here on this slide, is that our WPC 25 to 49.9%, we did see a decrease in that as well. But if we take a look at the top row of this, our higher protein products saw an increase. So I think that's kind of interesting here as we take a look at, you know, the same product, but lower protein at a decrease. Higher protein seemed to have quite a bit more production. So the 5.6% year-to-date change in production, which comes out to that 15 million pounds. Whey protein isolates, again, 42% increase year-to-date with about 47 million pounds. And then MPCs, again, year-to-date, 51%, and that almost 95 million pound increase. I wanted to include fluid milk sales here because there's been some grumblings or some discussion that fluid milk sales have come around or peaked up a bit. I know for a very long time when we look at per capita consumption of fluid milk that it just kind of hockey sticks straight down and to the right, which means decreasing over time. So we'll see here, some categories may have growth. The big takeaway from this is that I think it's yet to be seen if you know, this trend of moving away from fluid milk has reached its bottom, or if we're you know, at a leveling or growth point. Time will tell, right? But when we do take a look, you know, whole milk is still very much the predominant product when we take a look at fluid milk sales, followed by reduced fat milk, or that 2%, and then our 1% milk comes in third there. The one product category that we'll talk about here in just a second that's been gaining a lot of attention is this one on the very top, this we'll call it a peach or coral or salmon color on the top here that says other fluid milk, which is 5.4% of fluid milk sales. So if we take a look in that product category that we just mentioned, this other fluid milk products at the very bottom of the table, it did have a year-to-date change of almost 40%. So, and it did have a fairly sizable increase in the amount of pounds as well. But it's all these different products, eggnogs and other sort of specialty or seasonal products that come in fall into that category, right? So I would say as we look at percent changes in size of this total fluid marketplace, that, you know, like I said before, it's always good if we can clear more product, but, you know, clearing product in that whole milk, you know, 1%, 2% is obviously going to be, you know, more influential and translate into a higher producer pay price a lot more rapidly than some of the other minor categories, right? But on the good news, though, is that whole milk year to date was up 2.2%, which is absolutely terrific. You know, if we can keep seeing some increases there, I think we will be on the right trend. I did want to highlight it, you know, second to the bottom row here, we do have fat-free skim milk down 10% year to date, which is, you know, almost that 200 million pound mark. So again, I think that's interesting to see that across product categories too, ice cream, yogurt, fluid milk, you know, not as many people reaching for at least not as much production of this of the fat-free product category. Now, as we kind of transition into some of our more market and outlook sort of topics, I think looking at the retail prices of these product categories is kind of a nice segue there, and also kind of tells us where some of our price sensitivities are. So this is just aggregate cheese price over time. So I went back to 2016, and then this goes all the way through, I do believe, November here, so fairly recent. That trend line is increasing, and we do have some outliers of higher prices for cheese, but more or less, you know, we stay fairly range bound around that, you know, around that trend line. Even with, you know, higher class 3 prices, it seems like, you know, when we do receive that, you know, there is some sensitivity on the retail side or on the cheese price side that, you know, I think we stay within, you know, within the bounds here of this trend line. Now, kind of putting that against butter here, we see kind of a different trend. We saw, you know, from 2016 all the way through a good part of 2021, you know, range bound around that, let's call it 325-ish, right, per pound. And then as we got into 2022 and then going forward to today, kind of that whole range stepped up, right? So now we're closer to that, let's call it 425, 430 mark, right, as far as where our trend line or our average is in there. So I think that's another indicator where, as we look at this class 4 price coming up, you know, we'll see some support for that. Now, just kind of very quickly looking at where some of our bulls and bears are in the marketplace, you know, our cheese stocks are relatively low. Demand has been fairly good. We've booked some exports. High protein whey has been good. Butter is strong. The rest of the world has been holding off on some of their production. Some of the things to look at here, I think one of the biggest unknowns is our where we're going to be at politically. There was just an article out today that looked at or that talked about some decrease in funding for SNAP food benefits, or if there's tariffs, things like this, I think could be very impactful on where milk price could end up. Also, seasonality, we're coming into a time where we do see some seasonal pressures there. So, you know, I think that seeing some milk price pressure from that, certainly a possibility. Our cow numbers are increasing and our components are too. So it seems like we're getting, you know, some pressures potentially coming in there. This is some work done by Dr. Chris Wolf out of Cornell and looking at what makes a good year as far as return on assets for dairy farmers go. And not a big surprise, it's when milk supply is low, exports are high, and our ending stocks are high. So as we take a look at where, you know, some of these factors might lie, you know, we've really seen this resurgence in cow numbers recently, which I don't think is a big surprise as we've seen more as we've seen margins definitely return to the dairy producer here. So I think it's reasonable to think that cow numbers will continue to rise over time as we go into 2025. And our slaughter is down, so generally that means that we're hanging on to our animals a bit longer. One thing I do want to look at is this U.S. milk production year over year. So you can tell we're generally within range most of the months here on this blue line. But if we take and graph it to our year-to-date milk production, we're down 0.25%. So we'll circle back to that, but I do want you to remember that. As we mentioned previously here, we do have a lot of production capacity coming online 2025 and beyond. I kind of stopped counting at $8 billion of new processing capacity. And the big question there is where the milk is going to come from and how we're going to satisfy that new demand. And this is part of the answer to that. We have our US all-fat milk test here. Again, every single month, we're just above where we were the previous year. And the same thing again on our test. The big thing I said before, we were up 0.25% in milk production, but because we're producing so many components, we're seeing our calculated amount of components up 12.24%, right? So as we look at satisfying a lot of this new capacity that's coming online, we're going to see, these components definitely be allocated to that. So just quickly here, we're going to hit some of the highlights for each product category. Our total cheese production has been good, and it will continue to increase. And I think that's why when we look at our cheese cold storage stocks, that the market isn't responding as much as it maybe would, simply because we know that there's more product coming out there. Our exports have been good. We have good value of total cheese exports. And our domestic disappearance has been fairly strong as well. We did see that our NDPSR block cheese prices have come down some. The nice side of that is that we did see some buying response to that, which kind of is contrary to what we've seen on the barrel side of things. So, hopefully that the block cheese will continue to carry the day there. On whey, our production has been down, our stocks are down. Domestically, we've been clearing product, but our exports have been, kind of in the middle range there. And as we look at our NDPSR graph, our prices have been increasing. I think a lot of this is due to that high protein whey. And the downside of that is that we have seen some price pressure there as far as sales go. So I've taken the liberty to graph out how milk is priced. And when we take a look at that class 3 side, I think the big things to watch out for is that cheese production. Right now our dry whey inventories are sitting pretty good. Our cheese inventories are sitting pretty good. Our dry whey sales have been strong and our cheese sales have been strong. But as this new production capacity comes online, I think that's the big thing to watch out for, and that will bring some of that orange, if you will, indicator in as we kind of look to 2025. Butter, our production is good. Stocks are doing well. Domestically, people are still eating butter. On the export side, we only export about 2% a year, so I wouldn't be as concerned about that. The one interesting thing here is that, we did see this decline in NDPSR price per pound, but slowly we've, maybe found a bottom on that and are coming back out. On our dry skim products here, just like we talked about before, some of our production is down. Domestic disappearance, I'd say, is in range, and our ending stocks are a bit tight, which I think all lead to this, price increase that we're seeing here. And now as we graph out our milk price again, NDM production is good. I think our class 4 price will hold for some time. Our NDM spot market price is doing quite well. And I think all these things kind of come together to that class 4 price being fairly range bound or to sticking to about where it is for the foreseeable future. On the demand side here, when we take a look at our restaurant performance index, the good news is that it's went up recently, but the big question is how long can that hold? we have two inflationary graphs here, and you can see that they just go up and to the right. And as we think about where folks are price point wise, it might be hard for them to keep eating food away from home. Just to kind of get to the end of some of our forecasting things here, let's take a look at our exports. Milk output year to date, we are quite a bit down from all the way from 2020. It was a high for us, and year to date we're trailing where we would like to be. We've kind of been hovering around that 16% of solids exported. And the big thing is, as we get more product into the marketplace with the production, what's that going to mean? A lot of people talk about where our exports are finding their homes, especially as we have these tariffs. In the bottom left side, you can see that Mexico is definitely a good purchaser of our cheese. And I think that's led nicely in their very strong unanticipated economic growth here. Well, maybe not unexpected, but better than predicted growth has really led to that very nice U.S. cheese export value in that bottom right graph for 2024 being very strong. So the one big thing to take a look at here is that top right graph where we have our dry whey exports. And again, very nice value there. And while our exports to China have been a bit less this year, what's interesting is that we are seeing exports to some of our other trading partners and countries up. So we are seeing somewhat of an offsetting effect to that. Whenever we talk about exports, I like to look at where our price is versus the global price. So I realize it might be a little bit hard to see, but our price is that the green bar up there. And whenever our price is above world price, that means that we are going to have some trouble exporting. So I would expect that the world is putting some price pressure on us. This I just wanted to point out as we get into the spring flush time of year. Last year we saw during this time that we did see a bit more production than what we historically did the last few years. So if that holds true again, that would be additional price pressures in 2025 over the next few months. When we look at production change in exports, the EU have decreased their exports and increased production, which again is some of that price pressure that they're facing. And we've done just the opposite. So we've increased our exports and decreased our production. So hopefully that will bode well for us as we continue into 2025 here. So I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that we haven't had any DMC payments. We've had very strong margins here recently. And I think that will continue into 2025, especially for the first quarter, maybe first half. CME does have our class 3 price here averaging out through November of 2025 to be $19.64. I do think that as we get into, like I said, that first quarter, first half, I think that if we're around that $20 mark, very reasonable. That class 4 price just above $20 on average. I think there's an argument for that coming or happening as well. When we take a look at just our DMC forecast, again, not a surprise. We're going to be, in that high margin type of area. So I like to put a graphic here where I think we're going to be, we'll be treading water, but with a smile on our faces. Profit margins do look good. I think they'll hold for a while. When we kind of take a look at where our price ranges are going to be, I think we'll be, maybe we'll hit that $25 per hundredweight. Maybe we'll get down to 18. The big thing here is processing capacity, right? And how quickly those are filled, how much of their demand is already accounted for by internal growth from their suppliers, right? And how much is going to be from the open market, and how quickly we get to capacity on that. So I think that's going to be kind of the thing that makes the biggest tail in prices at the moment that we're really waiting to see is, we could see a pretty big bump in the short term if we're not meeting the demand that those processors need and supply. and then, we'll ride it out and decrease from there. Otherwise, we wouldn't see, if a lot of this supply is already allocated and accounted for, I don't think we'd see that big price increase. But, eventually we'll get to the point where their supply is sufficient. And once that happens, and all that product enters the market, like we saw in one of the slides, that cheese market, it's going to be hard to demand a lot greater price. So if we have that much more product, I think we're going to see price pressures there. So we'll take questions in just a second here. But if anybody does have more or looking for more information, feel free to scan the QR code. Takes us to our farm management topic of website, and specifically the dairy section, where we have new content up there, close to weekly, if not every other. So with that, feel free to see what questions we have.
We sure will. Thank you, Leonard, for sharing all those statistics and your insight about the dairy industry for the upcoming year. There's certainly many moving parts that factor into the forecast, so I appreciate the knowledge and resources you utilize to speculate what might be coming down the dairy pipeline in 2025. This webinar will be posted on our website later this week. If you're an attendee, you'll receive an email when that is ready, so feel free to watch it again or share it with anybody that you think might be interested. Once again, you can find all of our previous webinars on our hortz.com webpage. We hope that you'll make plans to attend one of our future webinars. So if you want to just move the slide ahead, Leonard. Our webinars always take place on the second Monday of the month at noon Central Time. On February 10th, we'll have a presentation by Matt Lucy from the University of Missouri at Columbia, and he'll be presenting on a topic titled Understanding and Preventing Embryonic Loss in Dairy Cows. And then in March, we will have a presentation on low forage diets by Kirby Crowstead from the Ohio State University. So please make plans to attend those webinars if those topics interest you. If you have any questions, I just want to remind you, you can type them into the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel. We have just a few here that we will address right now, Leonard. So we'll get started. I'm going way back to the beginning, talking about the FMMO changes. How soon after the January 15th deadline do you think we'll know the results of the vote?
So we should know the results of the vote fairly soon after that January 15th date. And then it is important to note that before any implementation happens, USDA will issue a 30-day notice. So we'll know 30 days beforehand when any change does get implemented.
Question here, if skim milk powder is down, does that imply that more of the fresh product is being used in converted into other products? And if so, is that a good thing?
So that's a good question. So I don't have a great answer for that. One would hope, that's for sure. Part of it is that it could be based on availability as well. Historically, way back, that's what we saw. Sometimes as these product categories kind of have matured or developed into their individual standalone markets, sometimes that doesn't play as much of a factor, as much of a role. But so I guess I don't have a terrific answer for you there, but I think that would be a fairly solid conclusion to draw.
Our next question is on organic market, and any thoughts or predictions on dairy prices for organic milk in the year ahead?
So I did pull up and look at some of the organic stats here, just on the fluid side, and there was I believe it was don't quote me, but I believe it was around a 10% increase year to date in the fluid category there. I think that organics are they're not a commodity product in the traditional sense. They do have some of their niche or specialty sort of attributes, which makes their purchasing audience different than that of, say, the regular fluid gallon milk. So I think that buying demographic is not as influenced by inflationary pressures, or they have the expendable income. I think that you would expect the product category to hold more or less where it is at the moment, right? So I think that the income effect, if you will, would probably be one of the larger drivers there on that consumer side. So sorry, no great takeaway messages there. I think if if that purchasing base still has the income to do so and aren't affected by any of these inflationary pressures, then I think that space would more or less continue with the same sort of demand that they have currently.
Sure. Thank you for that insight. Anything to share on the export market and where dairy demand might go globally in the year ahead?
So it's a good question. The rest of the world seems to be holding off on increasing some of their production. And some of that is political pressures, some of that is political policy, things like this. Some of that is input costs. If that is the case, and if they're not putting out as much on the farm level or not growing as much, right? Then I think there's a real place for the U.S. market to step in. But the big thing there is, where we are at relative to what the world price is. And at the moment, we're still fairly strong, right? Our prices are really competitive, or we'll say high relatively. So that's kind of the big question at the moment is, will we be able to continue to move, high volumes at high prices? And then if we do need to decrease price in order to be competitive, what does that look like? So I think as we look at some of the processing that's coming online, I think it's important to think about, how much of that does need to go into the export market versus will be consumed at home, because I think that will definitely play a role on pricing all the way back to the farm level for sure in the coming year.
Since most of the non-fat product sales categories were down, as you showed in the data, is that an indication that consumers are moving toward lower full fat products, or are they moving away from dairy products completely? What do you think?
So to say that it's a definitive consumer trend, I think, right, from like an academic standpoint, I'd hold off on confirming that for sure. But I think anecdotally, right, it's very interesting to see that, these changes in production or changes in purchasing have happened and consistently across those categories. Given that we've seen decreases in those categories, but increases in their complementary higher fat or higher protein products, I would say potentially both, right? I think some people are switching, maybe some are going away from dairy totally. But, I do think since we do see increases on the other, ones that do have those more solids content, that, we are seeing some shift to those products. Some people call it the Ozempic effect here. I think as some of these weight loss drugs do become more widely used, that I think there's a case for dairy being part of the grocer's shopping cart, right? So I think that that might be a good spot for dairy in 2025 as well. So one fun thing, there was just a study out from Cornell that showed that they spend less money on their grocery bill. They spend less money going out to eat when they're on these drugs, but dairy seems to still be part of the diet. So I think that's maybe some good news for us.
Yeah, that seems to be really good news if we can keep our consumers eating dairy and drinking milk. And that concludes our Q&As for this webinar. So just want to thank our presenter once again, Leonard Polzin from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We really appreciate your presentation and for answering the questions that came in afterward. And as always, I want to thank all of our listeners out there. Really appreciate you making time to join us for this program at the start of a brand new year. And we hope to see you again on a future webinar. Happy New Year to each and every one of you from our team here at Hoard's Dairyman. And until next time, goodbye and please take care.